Welcome to Vertical City. I'm your host, Lennon Richardson. During each episode, I interview one of the world's top experts in architecture, urban design, engineering, or ecology so that we can better understand and develop solutions for sustainable living. Thank you for listening, and get ready to join us on another groundbreaking and uplifting episode. GluckPlus specializes in architect-led design build, which means they not only take responsibility for designing their clients' projects, but also constructing and commissioning them too. Prior to founding the company in 1972, Peter Gluck received a Master's of Architecture from Yale University and spent a significant amount of time in Japan, where he learned about traditional Japanese aesthetics and the practice of integrating construction and design, which is common there. Peter is joined today by his son and fellow principal, Thomas Gluck, who also holds a Master's of Architecture from Yale University and is responsible for several large and important projects at GluckPlus. Fellow principal Charlie Kaplan, who holds a Master's of Architecture from the University of Colorado and has worked for GluckPlus for 20 years, also joins the conversation today. The four of us discuss architect-led design build, the advantages it offers to both firms and their clients, and what implications this process might have on the development of vertical cities in the future. For complete show notes and links to everything discussed in this episode, visit verticalcity.org/podcast. GluckPlus, welcome to the Vertical City podcast. I would like you to start, since there's three of you, just to give a brief introduction and just your role in the company. Anyone can start.
Okay, I'll start with me. I'm Peter Gluck. I guess I started this whole thing, so I've been doing architecture and construction essentially since the late 60s, and so we've been doing the design build methodology for a long time. But primarily the purpose of it is to make, right from the beginning, is to make better buildings. It's not a business model. It's a way of making better buildings, which we can discuss as we go further.
Sure, I'm sure we'll definitely get into that. Thank you, Peter.
And I'm Charlie Kaplan. I've been in Peter's office since 1997, and I'm a principal in the firm. Came here very quickly out of school, realized very quickly that I wanted to be in a world where I was not just designing things, but making things at the same time.
That's cool, Charlie. I think that's a really interesting thought. And our third guest?
I'm Tom Gluck. I'm Peter's son. I have been in and out of the office, I guess you could say, since birth, but professionally for about 15 years. Came back full-time in about 2006. After maybe about 10 years or so of experience outside of this office. And I, too, and kind of really value the idea of designing while you're really considering the making and making while you're designing. So that's the design build aspect of it.
I'm noticing a theme here. All three of you have architectural backgrounds, is that correct?
Yes, we're all architects. We're all registered. We all went to architecture school.
Okay, just wanted to check. All right, great. So this is an open question for whoever feels they want to answer it, and if a couple people want to ping in, you can feel free. You guys can sort it out between yourselves. First question I want to ask is, can you just give a brief overview of the design build process, and how is it different than the traditional process?
I'll just do it real quickly. It's conceptually, it's not seeing a separation between the design of a building and its construction. It's the idea that there can be an integrated process which starts right from the beginning, which considers construction and design, and ends with the actual maintenance of the constructed building itself.
I didn't realize maintenance was also included.
Well, at its broadest level, what it really is the kind of the lead kind of coordinator, if you will, of the entire process. So there are times where it starts all the way from the very earliest conception with a client who may be looking for a property or may be thinking about a building, and at times can end all the way through the commissioning and even long-term, help with understanding how their building works and long-term operation issues with it.
That sounds like a very intuitive way of doing things. And I know that this was how architecture was historically practiced, if my understanding is correctly, but over time the industry has gotten away from that. Do you have any indications as to why that is?
Yeah, there are kind of two main reasons. The first of which is in the late 60s and early 70s, a tremendous amount of litigation in construction. So the idea that the architects' lawyers had was to avoid liability by avoiding the construction site itself, since almost all litigation stemmed from work done on the site. That's the first reason. The second reason is stemmed coming from the late 19th century, when there was a split between those who design and those who make. The architects and engineers wanted to increase their social status. They didn't want to be considered tradesmen. So there was a split between the Polytechnique and the Academy, which still exists, unfortunately.
Oh, I see. So it was a means of specializing, so as to distinguish oneself, if I'm kind of reiterating what you said.
Well, before that happened, there was really no distinction between an architect and a contractor. Or, for example, Central Park was designed by Olmsted, but Olmsted actually was the constructor as well.
I see.
So that there was no distinction, there was no division. So the division started when the professionals wanted more social status and they wanted their own place at the table, and they didn't want to be considered tradesmen.
I think it's also part of just a broader cultural movement that was happening at the turn of the century towards kind of specialization. The factories were being made where assembly lines with automobiles, and likewise in the professional trades, you had medicine became a very specialized. Over the course of the last century, it's become a very specialized discipline, and architecture likewise. It's been kind of divided up into various silos and kind of little pieces of expertise. As Peter said, part of it I think is kind of the result of legal ramifications and liabilities, but also I think bigger kind of cultural things that are happening.
And I think one of the things that's interesting is that obviously, as I think there are many more types of engineering, say, in the turn of the century, and that may have been part of the impetus for this, but obviously as today's technologies have gotten even more complicated, what we're finding is that division, which may have initially seemed necessary because you needed a special engineer to deal with steel versus concrete, and it wasn't just masons and kind of the knowledge within the trade, and with today's extremely fast-paced development in technologies and complexities, it's more critical, not less, that this is an integrated process, because so much of what's the development that's happening in today's technologies are occurring in real time, and it's actually the tradespeople and the vendors who really hold that information, and it's hard for engineers or consultants or designers or architects or planners to really keep up with all that. So it's becoming more of a necessity to involve everybody, not less of one, the way it kind of historically developed.
We often talk in terms of silos of responsibility. And the architect is required to deal with multiple silos of information. We're trying to break down those silos.
And the architect, can't be an expert in every field, but when you're building something like a building, which is kind of an amalgamation of all of these different sort of trades, there needs to be a quarterback. There needs to be somebody who's kind of organizing the whole thing. It has an overall goal, an overall mission, an overall design. It's more critical now than ever.
And so just to go back to your question having to do with the history of this and the notion of the master builder and how it got this way, we see now the role of the quarterback not as the master building who knows everything for all the reasons and knows it all for all the reasons Charlie just explained, but really is the coordinator, because there's so many expertise, and there's so many different aspects of the organism of what a building is that require integration. And so it's more about management and integration and strategizing how to implement and integrate all these different aspects to meet the primary goal of a building project, which is a new school, a new office building, a new house, whatever the goal is. And that's where the role of the architect, we feel, can be incredibly helpful.
We should probably maybe clarify, because there is a movement towards design build, in the construction architecture field at large. But most of it, I would say, is being driven by contractors. And so there's a design build methodology where the contractor essentially hires the architect, signs a contract with an architect, and is responsible directly to the owner. The model that we practice and the one we really believe in is called architect-led design build. And that's where we are both the architect designer and we are also the contractor. And specifically in our firm, we really differentiate ourselves because we're basically, each project is taken on by a team of really architects only. And that team of architects takes the project from conception, from the beginning, all the way through to completion and even beyond into commissioning and maintenance.
People trained as architects, but they're actually doing all these different phases of the job that we're talking about.
The real issue is the issue of responsibility. We take responsibility for the entire project, which means its design and its construction. And it's the issue of responsibility that comes up when we think of all these siloed bits of knowledge. That means that their knowledge and their responsibility only goes so far. Nobody is responsible for the entire entity. And we think it's really critical that the architect, in our case, the architect, take that responsibility on his shoulders.
And we think so. I think we think first that it's critical that someone does, and then, as Peter said, the person that makes the most sense to do that is the architect, because they're the ones who are tasked with the basic interpretation of a client's needs, and then turning that into some sort of program and built form. If it's the contractor, the primary criteria and under which this is developed has to do with cost and schedule, say, and that's missing. No one wants a building that comes in over budget or late, but that's not no one's primary goal is that. The primary goal is, like I said earlier, a new school, a new office building, a new housing complex, or whatever it may be,
and a building that is responsible and fits its need in the community. And it's the architect who understands the context of the building and the overall scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Contractor, that's not his role at all. So when he's driving the process, you tend not to get well-conceived buildings. It does work great when the goal of the building is clear. If it's a highway or a brewery or something, it's not an issue. But if it's a building that fits in the city, in the urban context, or even in the context of architecture as it exists in the history of modern architecture, that context, these are issues that are unknown to the contractor and uninterested.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, because if the architect is the one who's conceiving the idea and drawing up the plans, then it makes sense that they should be the one who sees it through to completion. I wonder, though, if the contractors are taking the lead on this. You mentioned that there's more contractors who are doing the design build process than architects, and I'm wondering if it's because they're more accustomed to shouldering the risk.
I think that's partly it, and I think that it's and this is where we feel the profession of architecture needs to kind of step to the plate. There's also a lack of that willingness to take that role within the profession. So the client has those needs; they're real needs. Every project needs someone to take on these things, and as architects have retreated to really focusing on the looks and planning and spatial configuration of a building and not its realization, contractors have stepped up, and as beautiful a building as someone designs, if it can't be built efficiently and in a timely way, the best laid plans can end up still a complete disaster from an owner's point of view.
And if responsibility is what we're really talking about, that's why a client would hire whoever he hires. He's interested in that person is responsible for its completion. I wouldn't say at this point that architects have the greatest reputation for responsibility.
I see. I wonder if architects are maybe hesitant to take the lead. Is this an education problem? Is it a problem with the education that architects are receiving?
That's a big part of it. I think Peter talked about it a little earlier. There was kind of a split between the academy and sort of the tradespeople that happened a century ago, and I think that split's continued, in educational institutions. I think it's breaking down now some. It seems like, more and more the students that we interview for positions here are coming from programs that are starting to incorporate design build, into their programming. So we are seeing it start to shift, and we're seeing a lot, many more students graduating from school who are really interested in the design build process.
I just gave a talk at UPenn, and one of the things that I was explaining there was that one of the reasons why we think we see this is that with the digital fabrication, which is now such an integral part of almost every architectural program, where they have 3D printers and laser cutters, the basic process that was initially really a studio-based process, which was building models by hand, now is essentially a little tiny design build loop, where they design something and then figure out how to lay it out on a file and then actually fabricate it and assemble it, is like a little mini building project in and of itself. And so I think it's coincidental, because I think the early developments of the early, I say like 10 years ago, of the implementation of some of the newer technologies with 3D modeling created an entirely virtual world, which is very removed from building. And now with digital fabrication, that virtual world and the building is become more integrated. And so students in school now are beginning to just inherently think about the making virtually and the fabricating really. And that essentially is the essence of a building project.
This is really interesting. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I recently interviewed Rhonda Phillips, who's the Dean of the Honors College at Purdue University, and her background is in the social sciences, but she was basically telling me the exact same thing about this. We went totally siloed, and now because of the advances in technology, and there's just so much information and so many different pieces that need to be connected, that you need somebody who's more of a generalist who understands a significant amount about all the different areas so that they can pull all the pieces together. I'm just mentioning that primarily for our listeners who may be interested in this conversation and want to have a follow-up listen with another conversation that echoes these same points of view.
And one thing I would add, it's really important to understand that in our perspective, this process only works when you really engage all of the expertise that's available within the greater industry. And we find, I think as we've all mentioned previously, that it's not only within the engineering and design and planning world, that there's an enormous amount of information that's actually from, as Charlie said, the trades, or from the actual people who are building buildings. And so our process of architect-led design build relies heavily on direct contact, feedback, and engaging obviously engineers and planners and us as architects, but also all of the actual construction personnel, because they're the ones who bring this whole other host of information and critical components that can make a design better. It's not just about coming up with something conceptually and then having it realized exactly as we conceived of it. It's about really getting everyone around the table. It's about true collaboration across many different sectors of the whole industry.
In service of the initial idea, in service of not only the architectural idea, but in its execution. So it gives agency to all of these people who have been frightened and have retreated into their silos. It kind of opens the windows for them.
That sounds like a major challenge. How do you go about doing that?
Maybe from a more technical point of view, I mean, really the medium by which we communicate with our consultants and with the tradespeople is through drawings. The drawings is kind of the technical tool and becomes kind of the visual common denominator that everyone can look at and kind of come to an understanding around. And so we take a lot of care in the way that we do our drawings and use them as a way of really communicating. We in fact change our drawings for different, depending on who it is that we're speaking with, so that the drawings become really effective communication tools.
I see. That's interesting.
And what we basically do is we take the process of the horrible process that happens when a project goes all the way through its design bid phase, and then it's clear that it's too expensive. So there's an operation to try to make it cheaper at that point, which is really not possible to do. We take that process and we flip it and we put it to the beginning of the project, so that we're engaging with our engineers and a series of subcontractors right very, very early in the process.
So you're not only architects, you're really the general contractors as well.
We are.
Yep, that's right. But I think in terms of just combining those two thoughts, drawings are our mode of communication, but the key to having them be as powerful as possible is to get those drawings out as early as possible and as many times as possible through the process.
And get them out not only to our engineers, but to tradespeople. So if we weren't the general contractor, we really wouldn't have an avenue to really talk to the tradespeople. But because we're the general contractor, we really can talk to the tradespeople from very early in the process.
So it's flipping value engineering, which is a nasty word, but one that tends to ruin buildings, and flips it from the wrong end of the process to the beginning of the process.
Work out all the kinks before you get started. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. Work them out through the process as you go along. By the time you're building, you've figured most of it out.
If you think of a building as an organism, almost like an animal, you can't, at the end of the design of an animal, you can't start changing its basic system.
Yes.
You have to understand, its heart and its all of the pieces of it early. And if it needs to be less expensive, you eliminate some of the systems, or you look at different systems. You can't do that at the end of the process.
And one of the things that I think is not intuitive, but is probably its greatest value, is that it's not just about working out the kinks so that everything runs smoothly once we get there, although that's obviously important. It's also that we may get feedback from early in design that turns out to generate a major new direction in the expression of the building, or in the planning of the building, or the way the building will be used. And this may come from a tradesperson or a subcontractor. And what it's doing, though, is actually making the entire building better, not just having the design that came out of our drafting tables to the field more exact, but actually really redirect, and in some cases major ways, the entire building solution. And that can also only happen if, as architects, we have the ability to make those changes. And so if there are changes to systems or things that happen late just by contractors, you can't reevaluate some of your design decisions. But we have that opportunity because we bring in that information early enough.
Another way to think about that is that if you're a designer and you fiddle on your paper and you come up with a perfect diagram of a building and then try to jam that through the process, and you come up with all kinds of problems. We allow the process itself to color the design. It's not a question of making the design less good. It's a question of making the design better, more appropriate, more relevant, more accurate.
When was GluckPlus founded?
Technically, it was 1972 when I first got my architectural license. Okay. I had been making buildings for 5 or 6 years before that.
I imagine that over time you've built up a lot of significant relationships with engineers and subcontractors, which obviously would make this process easier because you have these relationships, and so the people you're working with will trust you because they know that you're not going to try to screw them over or anything like that, having worked with you so many times. But I'm wondering if, say, you have you're bringing on a new person or a new team to work with you. Maybe it's a new subcontractor or something like that. What do you do to really help them understand that this is a different model and that it isn't about having these different silos who are trying to compete with one another in a way so that they can maximize their profits and minimize the risks? How do you instill this sense of faith and camaraderie between all the different parties?
Well, first of all, it's not right that we work with the same subcontractors. We don't.
Okay.
We're almost always working with a new group. Just parenthetically, a subcontractor might be one kind of an organization one day, 6 months or a year later, they're quite different because maybe they lost their lead guy, or they gained their lead guy, or maybe they have a lot of work, whereas last year they had no work. These are all issues that greatly affect the subcontractor. But I think the way that we gain their confidence is that we bring them to the table and we really ask them for their opinions. They're shocked when this happens because this is not normal.
Mm.
They want to be involved.
Yeah.
They desperately want to be able to talk to the designer and say, don't do it that way, do it this way, it's much better. But they're locked out of that project process, totally locked out. So it's amazing what happens when you bring them to the table and you respect them. And it runs all the way through from the design process to the actual construction. Our construction sites are very different because we respect our subs, we help our subs, and we expect them to do the same with us, and they do.
I think we find that it's actually pretty easy to gain the trust of a contractor. Where we do have longer-term relationships and where I think it is more difficult is when we're working within the normal realm of the architect with consulting engineers, because it's so, for almost all of them, this is a very different process. And we have developed relationships with a bunch of engineers who also were initially interested and then based over a couple of projects really see the value of this. But in the end, the goals, all of these goals, whether it's the architect, the consulting engineer, or the contractor or subcontractor, they're all aligned because what we're trying to all do is make things go smoothly. And that's when things go smoothly, then, everyone's happy, clients are happy, no one's losing money, things are going quickly. And so that's where it's also the incentive structure is aligned. Although in the normal process, it's often set up and is usually adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting aspect of that is that we work with a structural engineer and have for a very long time. So we're like a continuing team on all of our projects. And he finds that he can design the structure more directly with less extra safety factors, because he knows when he designs it, it's going to be built like that.
Oh.
So that what that means is that most engineers over-design everything because they have no idea how the stuff's actually going to get built.
I see. Wow. That's interesting.
Wow, exactly. And that relates to a huge amount of wasted money across all of construction.
Yeah, I could see how that would totally create a ton of inefficiencies with the traditional model. Some people are trying to shove extra stuff in because they don't know what's going to get through, and then other people are trying to cut it out because they're trying to save money.
Yeah, exactly. That's the push and pull.
Uh-huh. Right. So when you are say you're working with an engineer or a subcontractor, and they bring to the table this excellent idea that ends up saving you a bunch of money or just makes the final product that much better, are they rewarded beyond just the intrinsic value of knowing that their idea counted?
They're not rewarded financially. It's really a question of respect. I mean, we find that the subcontractors are so abused and so beaten up that just to be at the table and to feel that they're really participating in the evolution of the building makes a huge difference.
It's really breaking down those barriers that Peter was talking about earlier that were set up, a long time ago that really separated tradespeople from professionals. And I think it makes tradespeople feel like they're part of the professional world and vice versa. It's kind of a breaking down of cultural barriers that I think when it starts to happen, everyone likes.
There's another aspect to it, and that is that we respect the subcontractors not only for their ideas, but we respect them for what they're trying to do. That they're business people. They're trying to make a profit.
Yeah.
So one thing we do is we make sure, and this sounds simple, but one of the biggest problems that subcontractors have is they don't get paid. They don't get paid on time. We make sure that our people, if they do the work, get paid on time, and that's another way, and the best way of showing respect. To make sure that they've done the work, get paid. That doesn't happen out there in the real world.
I've done a little bit of consulting work with various trades, and I've heard that problem voiced frequently. It does make sense. Everything you're saying to me makes a lot of sense. We bring you to the table, we respect your ideas, we pay you on time, and I imagine that if you have a subcontractor who's putting a lot of good ideas, then they're going to be favored for work in the future as well. So it could end up rewarding them financially down the road.
That, and I think there is a hard to quantify, but I think real financial implication, which is that when everyone is really working together well, both what we draw as the contract documents, and that information has already been vetted partly by the subcontractor, so it is very achievable, and there are fewer unknowns. Then the project moves quickly, and so a subcontractor can get these drawings, and they can basically go right to realizing them without a whole process of kind of discovery of, this doesn't work and we have to fix this and we're going to have to go around this way and I didn't know. And every one of those little bumps in the road costs time, which costs them money. So if it's streamlined, they can and this is good for everybody because the building gets done quicker and everything gets done on time, they actually do end up needing less of whatever contingencies they have for unknowns because there are fewer of them.
We try to make sure in our drawings that the work that they're trying to achieve is understandable. So whereas often architects will make sections through typical conditions, we will spend all our time making drawings of those places that are very hard to understand and where all the money might be lost. So those places in a building are not generally focused on. That makes a huge difference to the people trying to build the building, that they really understand what they have to build. So when they bid it, they understand what it's going to cost.
The other thing, I think that again, is an architect-led design-build practice, and as architects who are kind of quarterbacking this process, we're doing this because we're trying to make great buildings, and we really try to foster a culture where the engineers and the tradespeople are all interested in that same endeavor of making a great building. And not every subcontractor really cares, but a lot of them really do, and a lot of them really want to take pride in their work. And so, in a way, we're offering a way for them to get involved in that process of making really a special building. And a lot of them really respond to that as well.
Yeah, I think that everybody, for the most part, I mean, we're sort of generalizing, but most people, that is a huge motivator, just doing something that matters. It's not just about going out and getting a paycheck. It's looking back once the building's completed and saying, yeah, I had a part in that, and this building is awesome.
Yeah, right. We almost invariably, when our projects are done, we have a big party because our clients tend to be happy and they like the idea of all the people that have worked on the job. And we often have subcontractors bringing their family to see what they've done, bring their wives and kids. Look what we've done here. Mm-hmm. And it's a really, really, really exciting, heartwarming event at the end of most of our projects like that.
Heartwarming was exactly what I was going to say.
Not a normal situation at the end of a project.
So design build, is this a growing trend? Are other firms picking this up?
Not enough.
What we're finding, and we spend a lot of time talking all over the U.S. about this, is that generally there seems to be consensus that the traditional model is not functioning well and not serving everybody, whether you're an owner or an architect or an engineer or a contractor. And so there's a lot of focus right now on other ways of addressing a system that is not functioning well. The design build on its broadest terms is definitely gaining an enormous amount of traction. There's not that much of it that is architect-led design build, although as we talk to architects around the country, we're finding there is a lot of interest, and there are firms that are starting to do it or starting to experiment with it. And we anticipate that it will start to grow. Well, it will. We're not sure or think that it'll ever maybe be the dominant mode of practicing, but something has to change in the current environment because it's too inefficient. And one of the ways that it's being solved right now, and this is as a problem for the architectural profession, is that contractors are taking the lead. And so they're coming to clients saying, look, you want a library, we'll get you a library. We'll take care of everything. There's a single source of responsibility. You're not going to have to go through the normal design, bid, build process, and that's incredibly appealing. And our one issue with that is that some of these fundamental, more kind of basic goals of a project may be underserved in that scenario. What's its place in its urban context? How might the program be reinterpreted as opposed to just kind of repeated based on precedent? Spatial sculpting of rooms and things that really affect the way people use and live and work in buildings.
There are other ways of doing this design build. One way is the most common way is for the lead to be the contractor. The contractor might even suggest that he'll use the drawings from the owner's architect, or it might even be a competition. And they'll take the competition drawings, and then the contractor will build the building. The problem is that the architect's involvement doesn't get much beyond the kind of cartoon that was developed early in the process. So, what does this mean to the profession of architecture when his role is less and less deep in the process, and that he's just doing preliminary design or schematic design, or what we call cartoon design, and then he's cut out of the process of making the drawings and making the building work to down all of the different levels below its initial image. And we're fearful that that's what will develop in the profession itself. When the contractors can make the drawings much better than the architects can, and have the wherewithal to use all of the new technology, and the cost of all that technology is high, that leaves the architect with less and less of a role in the process.
One thing that I love about that dialogue that you guys just had was, I asked, how often is this happening? And the first response was not enough, which surprised me and maybe surprised some of the listeners, because it would have been very easy for you to say, it doesn't happen very often, and that's what makes us special. That's what makes us different. But it really just echoes your approach to collaboration and openness by sharing this idea and wanting to get more and more architects involved in this sort of design build process.
Right. If you've seen some of our videos, that's half of our website is devoted to trying to explain what we do. This is not a process that we hide. Because it's a successful process, that it's our process. It's the way we think it should be done. We want other architects to do that.
In fact, there's a lot of the people that are practicing design build in the world out there today. A lot of the new people that are practicing are people that came out of our office and have moved to different places in the country and have started design build practices. Quite a few. We also invite. We had our landscape architect came in the other day and was interested in possibly initiating a design build practice. We kind of see part of our role is really kind of sharing and helping foster kind of a different environment for the way projects get delivered. in the world.
Yeah, we spent a day and a half showing him how we do the design build, because it just seems like a way of getting better landscapes. They have the same problem that they do with the split between the contractors and the designers.
A lot of people are interested, but they're scared of the nuts and bolts. They're scared of, how do the contracts work? Well, how do I deal with insurance? How do I deal with all the kind of technical issues? And we've been through all of that for many, many years now. So we're happy to kind of, share what we know.
So looking forward to the future, as buildings become, we're seeing more and more large pieces of infrastructure and structures being developed. How applicable do you feel that the design build process is to these mega structures?
It almost has to be done that way. The sort of bigger and more complex that a project becomes, the more that there has to be a system set up where the process is integrated. How could you design a huge, complicated building in a vacuum and then just hand it off to someone and hope that it somehow gets realized? Obviously, along the way, it's going to have to get modified, changed, deal with all the kind of constraints and necessities and costs. And so it needs to be a nimble, sort of integrated process. It might not be exactly the process that we're practicing, where the architect is the general contractor. I think it's probably going to have to be a kind of an integrated team of lots of different parties. And the trick will be, how do you kind of integrate that team together in a way where they're really working together? But I don't see how else you could really do it.
And would there be any other special considerations that would need to be made if, in the future, say we have a strong team of people from different backgrounds and we want to build the world's first vertical city, which would be several different towers that are tied together at multiple levels and that house all the functions and facilities that a normal city would house? What special considerations would need to be made when undergoing such a large project?
Well, I think you'd need to flip the construction. Part of it couldn't come at the end. It would have to come at the beginning. Scheduling would be hugely important. Developing the infrastructure would become very, very important. Would have to come before the design of the actual buildings. It would have to be a team event.
But again, I think it would lead. I think without careful thought, it might lead to the solution being, well, let's get the contractor on, because so much of this is infrastructure and logistics and staging and phasing and sequencing. And then when we understand those components, then we can bring in a designer to kind of put it together. If they really are a collaboration where those two, where both the logistics and realization and the kind of conceptual aspirations and goals of the project are done simultaneously, hand in hand, every step of the way, not we do one first and then transfer to another, that's when this would work at its, we think, that's when it would work at its kind of highest level.
An example would be, if you take the example of highway projects, major hospital projects, airports, every single one of these projects is done design build.
And they're similar in a way. They're kind of cities within cities. They're kind of self-contained cities in a way, those projects.
Major airport is a city.
Yeah. More of a horizontal city than what you're talking about, instead of a vertical city, but it's really the same.
And hospitals are, given how complex all the systems are and circulation paths, and again, that's also a case that's very often design build. But those programs are also very technical. And so there's always some kind of cladding or skin or expression or something that still is conceived of as kind of the architect's role in it. But in something where
the technical aspects drive, they kind of take precedence.
Exactly. The architecture is like clothes. It's like a dress. Or
I see.
A jacket put on the building.
Which I think we would contend would not be appropriate, or would be an incredible lost opportunity in the realization of, say, a vertical built environment. A vertical urban environment, a vertical city or something.
I'd be so critical in that vertical built environment, right? You're detached from the ground, which humans have been attached to the ground for a long time, and so you really would want to make that. You really want to be thinking about how do you make a place and a series of places that still resonate with how people think and live and create memories and all of those kinds of things that we've done for so long. How do you take those into account and make sure they're incorporated and it doesn't just become kind of a mechanistic place to live? That has to be part and parcel of every sort of decision that's made.
A question that's often asked of us is how do you scale up? The size of our buildings are like $20, $30 million buildings, but how do you scale up to a larger building? And we're finding solutions to that because we're doing a larger building in Philadelphia that Thomas might talk about.
Yeah, so what we're on our smaller projects where, as Charlie said, we are the architect and the general contractor. On our larger projects, what we're finding is that by partnering with a contractor and really working together, where we can each bring to the table kind of our expertise, but the overall goals are the same, which is to make the best environment, the best built environment as efficiently and smartly as possible, where our goals are not adverse. We find it an incredibly powerful tool. And then in that mode, there is no real limit to size.
Where do we add value? That's the question we ask ourselves. Where in this process do we add value? And where we add value is where we can touch the contractors and where we can have discussions with them because we own the drawings. We're able to change and modify and reevaluate the construction documents themselves. Whereas when a contractor is faced with a normal set of architectural drawings, they're fixed. He has to do them. He has to bid them the way they're drawn, and they're often not drawn as they might be.
And that's exactly it, because then where does a contractor add value? They add value because they understand all these different ways of how things go together and how to improve them. But they're without a willing and partnered architect, they don't have the ability to make those changes. So it's really about maximizing and optimizing all of the value of all the various players, and that has to happen together in a collaborative team environment.
So what is this project that you briefly mentioned, the large one?
It's a multifamily project, housing project right in Old City in Philadelphia.
With commercial component.
Yeah, mixed use. It has use. Yeah.
And in this one, you've partnered with the general contractor. Do you still have access to the subs?
Yep, complete.
That's good.
And so there are times where so we've had a lot of direct contact with the subs early in the process, which has been critical. And we still have the benefit of a major construction manager who has a lot of resources and experience in-house in pulling off a project. I mean, it's not a huge project, but it's about 200,000 square feet. But it's a scale at which beyond this, it could be this model could continue and scale up to 2 million square feet.
Mm.
And we have somebody from our team, an architect, who's permanently stationed on site, integrated fully into the construction management team.
Wow.
He's doing things that make life easy for the subcontractors, and the subcontractors are surprised and delighted at the fact that all of this work is being done for them. It's making the project go much faster, much more efficiently, with very, very few change orders and very, very little conflict on the job.
One of the key takeaways I'm getting from this discussion is starting with why instead of the how. Why is it important that we build the environment in a way that people will enjoy? Why is it important that we create spaces that mimic nature instead of, we can build it now, let's, as you mentioned, put the clothes on it?
Yeah. How should it be done as opposed to how is it done?
I see.
How could it be done?
Yeah, I don't know. We don't accept the way things are done. We're skeptical of the way things are done.
And the reason that is so important is because it's such an enormous investment. If you were to add up all the hours of everyone working on any one project, large or small, from its conception all the way through to its creation. It's such an incredible volume of resources to have it not working towards the best possible, or at least have spent as much time as possible conceiving of what that should be, seems like an incredibly lost opportunity. And yet there are a lot of buildings that kind of aren't given that opportunity to really conceive of what it might want to be, instead of just jumping in and doing it.
And traditionally, there's just a mammoth amount of waste in a normal project. Mammoth amount of waste, just inconceivable. People don't really identify. They don't realize what the waste is. It's also anybody who's been through a traditional building process is staggered by the degree to which it's a mess.
Again, that's something I've heard from the little bit of consulting work I've done working with contractors. And I've heard so many stories about subs doing things inefficiently on purpose because of the way that the project is set up, and they can suck a little bit more value out of it for themselves.
Yep.
Are there any other particular projects you're working on, or concepts or ideas, anything in general that you are really fond of that we hadn't had a chance to discuss that you would like to mention before we sign off?
Well, one of the things so we're also in the front end of a project that's a similar scale to the one we were just talking about in Philadelphia, but it's affordable housing in East New York. And one of the things that we see as a great opportunity out of this process is done more efficiently and more cost effectively. We're able to apply them to building types that may not get as much attention because they don't have the same, at least dollar value in society. So not-for-profits in the inner city, affordable housing around the country. And the process is, that value is relevant to everybody, but in some ways even more critical for a very a program that is very lean. So we see an opportunity here for architects and everybody, planners and everyone, to be involved in portions of project or projects that are often initially conceived as not being able to afford the kind of planning and thinking on the front end, so it has a social component.
Yeah, and we feel that these are the kinds of projects that can't afford not to have this kind of thinking involved. So why in a project like this is the last person that average businessman would think to hire would be the architect. That would be the last person. That's because the general conception of the architect is he's some fuzzy-headed guy who's going to make things cost more and create leaks. I mean, sadly enough, that's the common view of an architect. A kind of a character with funny glasses who makes things leak.
Artist of sorts.
An artiste.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I have a pretty strong indication of what this last question is going to lead to, but I want to ask if you have a call to action that you would like to make for our listeners or for the industry, or any parting words you'd like to give before we say goodbye.
I think it's pretty simple. I don't think architects necessarily should do what we're doing, but I think that rather than retreating from responsibility, they should try in every way that they can to grab responsibility, and with the responsibility comes being responsible. I think there are lots of ways to do that other than the kind of full-blown methodology that we've been talking about. But rather than this retreat retreat to software, I think is a terrible mistake.
How about let's give each one of our guests a chance to answer that question.
When we talk to young people in school, students or young architects who have just graduated, they all express the desire to do more, and they look at the profession and they say, I don't want to be limited to this or that. And so the very simple kind of call to arms is, don't be intimidated by the state of the practice, and in any and every way possible, get involved, take more responsibility, do more, and you'll have a bigger impact on your profession, on our collective built environment. And we think that overall will improve not just the status of architects, but the world we're living in today.
And I have maybe two things. One is, to really not just speaking to people that are in the profession, but to clients, for clients, people that are going to build buildings, people who run a not-for-profit, to go out there and really demand that the people that they're working with, that the architects and the contractors really collaborate together to make a great project. I think that's really important. I think the other thing is for people who are interested in the profession, students and young people, that they break down boundaries, that they don't necessarily just go and look for the architecture job at a corporate firm. They go out and they work in the construction field for some time, or they go out and they work, for a developer. But they kind of think outside of the box in terms of what the profession really means.
Right. I think those are all very good notes that you've given. I'm going to give myself the same opportunity, and my call to action to the listeners is to check out GluckPlus.com. It's GLUCK plus.com. Website's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for joining us on the conversation today, all three of you. And also to our listeners, show notes to everything we've discussed and links can be found by visiting verticalcity.org/podcast. Well, GluckPlus, thanks again for all three of you joining me on the podcast.
Thanks, Lennon. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vertical City. Learn more about the Vertical City concept and continue the conversation by visiting our website, verticalcity.org. I truly hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review on iTunes, and most importantly, share Vertical City with your friends and colleagues so that together we can create solutions for sustainable living. I'm Lennon Richardson, signing off for the Vertical City team. See you next time.